Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed Korra Rewatch video. This one's going to be for K401 after all these years. First episode of Book 4, Balance, and yeah, we've started the final season. Would have started this a little earlier on in the week, but a couple of things happened. One, the Pokemon reveal happened and I wanted to do a video on that, so that took up one day. And then, I suppose the other reason was that after the news that came out earlier on that like Team Avatar Tales was delayed, I was pretty frustrated with just Avatar stuff in general. So I kind of just like, okay, I'm not gonna record that video like within a day or two of that announcement because my frustration with the delay is probably gonna come through in the video. So I waited until like I could kind of calm down a little bit and accept that. But okay, well, let's start this off. Overall, with Book 4, Balance, now that we're getting into it, I like it, but it does have its issues. I think it, for me, ends up being a little closer to Book 3 than some of the other books, just because I feel it has some bigger, like, what were they doing here kind of issues than the other ones. Similarly to Book 3, I think some of it comes down to the villain, and specifically the development of the villain not being as well done as I would have wanted to. I like Kuvira as a villain, but I think they skip past most of the key scenes that explain her motivation, explain the sort of turn for the character, and I think it does end up affecting the book a lot to the point where really she's sort of in a way saved as a character by her like final scene with Korra basically in the book. There's some other stuff just with regards to like characters, like we'll talk about Wu as we get into this a little later on. I don't have that big of a problem with him, but he does, I think, detract from some other things. Certain characters really don't get the time or focus that they need, but overall I think it is a very, very solid book. It I think solves the immediate problem that Book 3 had, that being that Korra didn't really have an arc of her own. She kind of came in at the end, made the big sacrifice, and it set up this book. What this book has is Korra's return arc is very well done, in that she gets a huge focus. I think the problem with it is that it takes so many episodes that by the time she's back, you don't get a lot of time of her, like, with Mako, with Asami, with Bolin, like, just seeing the characters back together as a team because there's so much happening. And I think that's just another case of, because the Korra books are shorter than Avatar books, that ends up being a bit of an issue, and that Korra's return only happens like halfway through this book, and the time taken to get there is good, it's just the time afterwards, there's not quite enough of it, to the point where like she's only just like fully back by like episode 9, I think it is, or it's either 8 or 9. Either way, like she's only back in or around the last couple of episodes, and then we're into the finale basically. I think that's where you sort of see some of the issues come in, but overall, like Bolin gets an arc, Opal, the Beifongs kind of get their kind of bit of an arc, with Toph kind of coming back into things. I think it comes together very nicely, and this is a good first episode here after all these years, because immediately time skips, so characters have new designs, and it's very interesting to see in that I think Korra's one is the most interesting, even here when we don't have her like Avatar Korra design just yet. Just the different hairstyle, she's the one who sort of in a way looks the most different, whereas like Asami just looks like a sort of 3 years older version of Asami. Mako has a different hairstyle, but it almost, Mako's look for most of this book, I think, takes away some of his kind of uniqueness in a way. I'm not the biggest fan of the very kind of short hairstyle he has here. I think taking away his kind of spiky hairstyle and does affect him. Not to mention, I think the outfit he's wearing for a lot of this isn't particularly interesting either. Bolin, definitely you can tell like he goes through his kind of big kind of maturity kind of arc here of like he's still himself, but he's not as like really kind of silly like he was in earlier books, and his arc is very, very interesting. But I think it's the younger characters where you really, really see the difference in that, like, Kai, being like, he looks kind of on the same kind of age level as Opal, even though, like, back in book 3 when both were introduced, he was clearly much younger. Janora obviously kind of has a big kind of change in look. Obviously, she had to shave her hair off for her ceremony at the end, but she has it back now, and it's a different style. All the airbenders are wearing their kind of wingsuits. Iki looks obviously different. Milo does as well. With the kind of changes to hairstyles, and then with the older characters, you just see that they've slightly kind of aged them a bit. So I like a lot of that. As for them kind of explaining what's happened in the last 3 years, I think they do an okay job. The intro kind of explaining that, okay, they've renamed like Republic City Park to Avatar Korra Park. Cool. And they explain that it's sort of like a tourist attraction for Republic City, that it has the spirit wilds, and that seemingly humans and spirits have been getting on fairly okay. But I think the thing that ends up happening here is that they kind of say that, like, there's a good relationship here, but then when it really comes down to it, the spirits abandon humans when the action starts in the city, and that's what needs to be resolved because of what they've set up here. It goes from being like people are fairly okay with it to suddenly, no, we're leaving, we're not going to help you with this. Even though the spirits sort of have a reason to, in a way, fight because of what Kuvira is doing to, like, the spirit vines and stuff like that later on in the book. So that's a bit of an issue, but just establishing that, like, Korra has been out of action for 3 years. Like, she according to, like, the media in the city, they are expecting her to come back for the coronation, that being her first kind of appearance in 3 years. And they're still expecting her to, like, get well soon. I think that's really, really interesting because you weren't really sure after book 3 what way they were going to do it. Like, she's really injured. I don't think they're going to have her, like, just be in a wheelchair for the rest of the book. They're going to have her make a recovery, but how long does it take? And just to do a 3-year time skip that she hasn't come back, and then by the end of this episode reveal that she's kind of been lying to her, like, parents about, like, where she's been. She said she left to return to the city like 6 months ago, but hasn't. And then we catch up with her, the really shocking part of this episode, probably the most intriguing part of the episode. I think the section of this book that got the discussion back to, like, the levels it was at in, like, book 1 was just what's going on with Korra early on in this book. Across, like, episode 1 and 2. I thought that was really, really well done here to just shock the audience with this, Korra somewhere in the Earth Kingdom participating in a, MMA style earthbending match. Like, okay, she's back on her feet, she's moving well, she's participating in, like, an athletic event, basically, she's bending, but she loses fairly comfortably, and she's kind of struggling with her bending. So you can immediately see that, like, okay, so she's recovered for the most part, but she's trying to get back to that level. But then they kind of go into the more mental side of things, of, like, okay, physically she's fine, but how does she actually feel about all of this? Why hasn't she come back? And to just go straight in with, you look like the Avatar, and her say, like, yeah, I get that a lot. She's going undercover. She's not like she would be in book 1, 2, and 3, walking in the door, announcing herself as the Avatar, everything she's wanted to be. That's been Korra for books 1, 2, and 3. Nothing but wanting to be the Avatar, and now all of a sudden she's, like, hiding her true identity from people. And the big one at the end is just, like, the guy asking her the question, like, whatever happened to her, and her saying, I wouldn't know. As if, like, from his perspective, it's just this person who happens to look like her saying, I don't actually know. But because we know it's Korra, she wouldn't know because she honestly doesn't know what's up with herself. And I think that's the most interesting part of this, of just she doesn't fully know what the problem is. Why isn't her bending as strong as it usually is? Why aren't her like reactions, her movements as good as it was? Why is she hiding from being the Avatar? And they're the big questions going into the second episode, Korra Alone. And I think it's an amazing way to end the episode, to immediately present that arc. That I think it would have been a little bit of a cop-out if they just had Korra arrive back, fit and healthy, ready to go. It's taken 3 years to do her recovery, so she's maybe a bit rusty, but she's back. Doing it this way, where it's been 3 years, but she's not back to the way she needs to be. That, in a way, if she came back, she's not good enough to, in a way, like, be the Avatar on the level that she needs to be. That is so much more of an interesting character arc, and I think they really got it right, the approach with Korra for this book. Again, like, does it take a little long to get there? I think I would say yes. Just because you only have 13 episodes, so you're only having her return in episode 7, you're still having a recovery go on right up until the whole Zahir stuff, a little bit after that. You're not giving yourself a lot of time with fully recovered Korra at the end. Now, maybe they knew the comics were going to be a thing afterwards, that's fine, but in the show, I think we could have used a little bit more time, and that's where, if it was 20 episodes, and you had like, basically the last 10 episodes to do things, I think it would have been good, really good. But yeah, that's I suppose leading with the end thing, the big thing at the end there, Korra. I really was a fan of what they did here, because it was this. I think it was one of the real first times in a while that the series has just had a just really honest, really, really good cliffhanger of where are they going with this? Where is Korra? The fact that her father doesn't know, according to her parents, like, they thought she was in the city, and especially the going as far as to send letters saying that she's fine in the city. It's really, really crazy. But yeah, let's get into the rest of the episode, which again is interesting that they have Korra be at the very end, that they set it up from the start. Korra will return for the coronation. And so the plot is basically the coronation of what? What is the actual event of the coronation? And it's the introduction of Prince Wu, who is next in line to the Earth Kingdom throne. And Mako's his bodyguard, as he's kind of staying in the city while Kuvira basically stabilizes the Earth Kingdom. So they don't quite explain it just yet, but in the next couple of episodes they're going to get into explaining that effectively Kuvira has, to a degree, with Korra out of action, taken on that role of being the one who's meant to bring balance back to things, stabilize the Earth Kingdom, and allow basically Wu to step back into power. But obviously we'll see that she's not going to do that. The power has sort of got to her head. She feels that she's the better ruler than he is. But still, Asami has helped with the construction of the kind of rail system throughout Republic City and the Earth Kingdom, which we sort of see. That's just an interesting, like, structural sort of thing that's going on here, that I think is meant to link into the whole Varric thing as well, with, like, he was experimenting on, like, magnets and stuff like that before, and I think that's how the train system works. So that sort of connects everything back together, that, potentially Asami and Varric were working together. And then I think the biggest thing with the rest of the team is just that Bolin has joined up with Kuvira and is helping her kind of bring the Earth Kingdom back together. And we see that obviously Opal is frustrated with this because she's not happy with Kuvira after what Kuvira did. But everyone else can sort of see that Bolin has sort of finally found what he kind of needs to do. It is this kind of helping others, in a way, sort of charity work, that you can see that Bolin's at his best when he's handing out the supplies to people and helping them get back on their feet and stuff like that. So it's cool to see him finally, like, after going through so much, like Mover Star, Pro Bending Star, this and that, finally realizes that fundamentally what he wants out of a kind of career is just to kind of help people. And that comes in a way from his work with Team Avatar, but like wanting to make that into like a proper job. So I think that works to just have him, like most people are fairly happy that he's kind of found this kind of role and he's like matured basically over the last 3 years. But with Opal, you obviously get the more personal side of what's happened, and I think this is probably for me one of the biggest like issues with this book. It's that the issue with Opal is ultimately links into what is the ultimate shift for Kuvira. Kuvira was introduced as a hero character at the end of book 3. She saved Korra's father from that big fall. She introduces herself on screen to Tonrock and us. I'm Kuvira. We get the idea that she's more or less one of the head Zaofu guards. There's something, like some sort of a connection between her and Sue. And then you jump into this book and basically you're like, oh yeah, Kuvira is dating Bachar Jr., the one of the Sue's kind of, son who you didn't properly meet in the last book. You just kind of walked by with Bachar Sr. And she's dating him. They're engaged to be married. And they've caused a bit of a rift in the Beifong family because they basically left Zaofu under very bad terms. They haven't gone into full depth on what exactly happened, but the family's almost interpreting it as like Kuvira stole Bachar from them. And the other side of things that we're going to get into is the whole that this comes down to a disagreement over how to handle what happened with the Earth Kingdom. About basically Sue didn't agree with the whole unite the nations thing and do the kind of role of the Avatar without the Avatar involved side of things, and that's where the issue came from. I think the problem is that, again, it's the book 3 issue. They've told us and they haven't shown us. And what are we ultimately missing from Kuvira is the more kind of personal side of things. The fact that we don't really get to know who she was before she turned into this tyrant, basically. And that's where that scene would have worked. Where did the relationship with Bachar Jr. come from? They more or less get to explaining that Kuvira is Sue's adopted daughter. How close are they? And why did this rip that seemingly very, very close relationship apart? Who was Kuvira before this in more depth? Why would she so, I suppose, vehemently want to do all of this? And the problem is that they leave basically all of that to be explained by the final scene between Korra and Kuvira in the spirit world. And it's a very, very good scene. We'll get to it right at the end of this book. But it's not good enough to just immediately link everything together. This is, I think, a prime example. In like with the Red Lotus, it's like they're missing a lot of scenes. Like they're missing backstories for all of the characters, the scenes with the Red Lotus itself, the flashback to the initial fight. Here, I really do think it's just this one scene. This potentially, like, you devote, a third to a half of an episode to show a flashback in full of what happened, what caused the argument, how did Kuvira plan all of this to get to the Earth Empire that we see here. I'm not overly happy at the fact that they give the most minor of flashbacks, and they have the confrontation with Sue, but the fact that it's not really established how close they are, it feels weird then when you're like dealing with the fact that this is Sue versus Kuvira for at least some part of this book. That's one of like the key rivalries basically up until Korra comes back. It is this kind of conflict between Sue and Kuvira because they were so close. But it's again an example of like, we're only told that they're so close. Book 3 never really makes it clear that she is more or less part of the family as well. And that's why it's kind of so weird to see such, like Opal especially, her entire arc is that she feels in a way betrayed by what's happened, and feels betrayed by Bolin because he went to join Kuvira when she has issues with Kuvira. And the fact that you don't really go in depth to explain her thoughts on that, like Wei and Wing's thoughts, Sue's, like the father's. And I think the end result of this is, what you're really missing is that you don't give depth to Batar Jr. as a character. Because he ends up being like very, very important. The reason Kuvira is like with Batar is because she sees the potential that he has that's sort of being lost in the shadow of his father. And she can see that he actually has the potential to come up with like inventions and engineer stuff that's far beyond even him and what Zaofu has. And that's why she, you know, I suppose potentially like initially faked a relationship. And again, this is where the lack of depth kind of comes in, of like, we know he really cares about her, he loves her. We really don't know if she likes him or not by the end of the book. It's okay, clear that she's able to like to some degree put him aside for like a big moment, but is there actually anything there in the first place? Or does she just want to use him for his intelligence? Because they do give you at least the seeds of a solid arc with Batar and his father, and the like, I'm in the shadow of you. My name is just your name, and I'm the junior. I'm only known as Junior, not by my own name. Like, I wasn't even introduced in book 3. That's kind of part of his arc, that he was the least unique of all of Sue's children, and that's why he took this opportunity to go and kind of find his own way with Kuvira. But I think just the lack of depth takes away just from understanding the motivations of Kuvira, because we'll get into it later on, and at least part of this episode deals with it, of just where does the like cruelty, where does the tyrant side of Kuvira come from? That's what I think is really not explained. It's the side that we get explained of Amon. We get the context for why he would be a bender who opposes bending. Similarly with Unalaq, we get why he would be so extreme about forcing spirituality upon people, because he really believes that this is what's kind of ruining the world. The Red Lotus, like, you can see how intense they are about their freedom, and because we don't really know about how they got to that point, you can sort of accept it. But because Kuvira was introduced as being on the good guy side of things, the fact that she's now suddenly this tyrant who's like manipulating states to get these deals where she's now the one in power, she's like forcing people to like bow down in front of her, call her the great uniter, and then especially some of the stuff we'll see later on, where she becomes basically like racist against the other nations, where she only cares about, in a way, like rehabilitating the people who are from the Earth Nation, the Earth Kingdom, and, you know, anyone else is just basically made a slave. Even though the world is now kind of more kind of spread out around the place, and the fact that you're from the Earth Kingdom doesn't mean as much anymore, she's still like, no, you're from the Fire Nation, I don't care about you. Where does that come from? That's where I've always, like, in a way, missed some of Kuvira. I get why she's so liked in a similar way to the Red Lotus, because on screen when she talks to characters, she's got a certain like personality. In the action scenes, she's got a unique style and is very powerful and commanding. But the motivation, how this character got from there to there, I think is sort of missing. And it's another, I suppose, victim of just there not being enough episodes to cover that. And that's why I suppose some of the stuff with Wu is kind of like, yeah, you focus on Wu a little too much. But Kuvira introduced here, I think she is a strong enough character to be the villain. You can see that just by the way she takes out those bandits with the super accurate metal bending. She doesn't use like earth bending really all that much. She very much focuses on metal bending, and even then she kind of has her own unique style of metal bending where she doesn't move as much, but when she does move, she does these really kind of like quick movements, which is kind of like the opposite of the Bei Fong style, which is more kind of power focused. You know, like Lin, I suppose, represents Toph's style the most, and then Sue has a more sort of hybrid style where she can do the power moves, but she tends to lean more towards doing more kind of accurate moves, and I suppose you can sort of see where Kuvira focused her abilities on. But still, just very, very cool. And just the fact that like you learn that the Earth Empire is 90% of the way towards capturing all of the Earth Kingdom. And of course we're going to learn that the few places left are basically like Zaofu is like the key one, and they're that close. And just little moments that get across just the type of character that she is, at least at this point. Like the train suddenly comes to a stop, and she's sort of unwilling to take that step back to balance herself until right at the moment that she absolutely has to. And she's almost like annoyed at the people for like forcing her to take that step to balance herself, and that's why she kind of goes out to deal with them. That I think really gets across just the type of character that she is. It's Kuvira's, you know, Azula, do the tides command this ship moment. Here of just seeing her deal with these kind of prisoners and what goes on here. You see like the manipulation as well of the fact that I think it becomes pretty clear that the supplies that Kai and Opal are going to deliver to the town of Yai are ultimately taken by what seem to be bandits, but very clearly it is bandits who are given lots of technology by Kuvira, and it was them who were stopping everything from happening. So you can see that that's her way of forcing people who disagree and want to still be kind of on their own, who maybe have stability, but she's now forcing them into a position where they have to join her. And that's the sort of tragic kind of part of this episode, in that the governor of Yai wants to keep his kind of state like neutral, away from the Earth Empire, and is doing everything he can to help his people. But eventually, like, there's only so much that can be helped, because the Air Nation is stretched so far, I suppose, with themselves having to help the entire world, but mainly the Earth Kingdom at this point, that only two young characters can come to help, and you know they can only do so much, and they reluctantly have to, you know, basically advise the governor to, we think you have to take the deal. It's the only way to help your people, and if that's what you want to do, you can be somewhat proud of the fact that you've helped them, even if you have to give up the power to her. And the fact that like Opal is kind of forced to agree to like giving this over to Kuvira, it's part of the arc here that like she sees Bolin comes in, but she knows behind the scenes what Kuvira is really like. She's heard the rumors of basically what she tries to do to the governor in their like one-on-one meeting. It is this manipulation of like, you know, he knows, we know. She's going to treat most of the people that she kind of gets to work for her as slaves, and she's taking control over this kind of state, and that's what her plan is. So I think she comes across very well here. It's just, again, the motivations and the development of the character is where it's missing, but just her on screen is perfectly fine, I think, as a character. But I do want the development, and that's what I will be critical of across this book, is that they don't give her that. We see that Varric is with Kuvira as well here, so obviously she took him as well, who's also adding to the whole inventing side of things. And so she has this kind of very strong team, and I suppose the team that she has of like her, Batar, Varric and Bolin is like she kind of has someone from like all of the key sort of like factions. She has the main like inventor character. She has the main engineer character who's going to affect the Beifong family. She has Bolin, and that's going to affect Team Avatar. And so she kind of has her hand in a little bit of like every single kind of important group, and there's a reason why they're all annoyed at her for like taking Bolin or taking Batar. And it works because you're going to see Bolin and Varric go on this arc of realizing that they've gone in with the wrong person, that they're being used for the wrong reasons. Again, with Bolin, I would have liked to have known how he came to join Kuvira, in that, like, my interpretation, knowing the calculating character that she is, would be that she potentially sought him out mainly because of his lava bending, just to take out someone who could have opposed her, who was that powerful, and impact Team Avatar in that way. That's my interpretation of it, but is there a deeper reason? We're not particularly sure. But it creates the issue because it means that Opal kind of double opposes Kuvira because she's kind of in a way taken her boyfriend away and her brother, and has had this huge effect on her family. So let's move on from Kuvira and get into the Airbenders. So Opal and Kai get a focus here, and what ends up happening with these two is that Kai sort of falls out of things after this, basically. Opal, again, isn't a main character for the entire book, but at least gets a focus here while we're still early days with Kuvira being introduced, and then comes back into things later on when we're finally dealing with the resolution of Bolin and Opal's relationship. So I think Opal is very well done over the course of this in terms of her development, how she eventually comes to, I suppose, forgive Bolin, and it links into Bolin's arc quite well, and how it later incorporates like Toph into things, and her arc with Lane, which is again another well done thing. Operation Beifong, very good episode later on. The Kai thing, though, I think is the problem, in that Jinora, who doesn't really get much of a focus or attention in this episode, isn't really used over the course of this book all that well. And it's similar for Kai, to the point where they have this focus of like, okay, here's Opal and Bolin's relationship. They're having troubles, but you can tell, like, if all this drama wasn't going on, they'd be okay as a couple. And we're just waiting to see how they resolve that. And then the only thing in the book where you confirm that Kai and Jinora are a couple, after some of the best probably setup for a relationship of them in book 3, all we get on their relationship is, we're doing fine. I think it's more or less that he says exactly that. How's your relationship going? We're doing fine. And that's it. I think they're in a scene together later on, more towards the final battle, but like Kai isn't a focus. Jinora is there, and they kind of treat her as being one of the more main characters, but she doesn't get like an arc, and their relationship doesn't get much focus after this either. So it's really frustrating to kind of see it done like that, just that we're not getting these characters developed as much as they should be. And for Jinora especially, it's frustrating because like her ceremony becoming a Master Airbender was the final scene of the last book. She's played a key role in the last 2 finales of the show, book 2 and book 3. And here's a book where you don't really give her all that much. Her best moment is probably her and Opal saving Korra from the first fight with Kuvira. And then after that, I think they in fact go as far as to almost weaken the character with some of the positions that they put her in. Of like, she's the spiritual one, but she gets captured by the spirit vines and has to be saved by Korra. She's the only other Master Airbender apart from Tenzin, but she has to be saved by like Tenzin and Iki, I think it is, during the final battle. It's just little moments like that I think, like, why did you do that after you'd set up Jinora so well? Like, you had it. You had this character who you can praise for being written and developed very well, and you just finally have them at a point where you can honestly say that like Jinora like could have joined Team Avatar realistically. If you had the team form back together, it would have been perfectly fine to just incorporate like Opal and Jinora and Kai probably into that team as a bigger Team Avatar if you wanted to. But they didn't for some reason. So I think there's frustration there. But I like the sort of friendship dynamic between Opal and Kai. I just wish you had established this in book 3. We had seen these two actually meet, at the very least, like literally just that I think would have been fine. Just seeing Opal arrive at the temple in book 3, start her training, and meet Kai and Jinora. That's all I think you needed to just get across that, okay, these two are going to be paired up here, while Jinora presumably is playing more of a teaching role in Republic City, as more of a kind of leader of the Air Nation, but she's still in a relationship with Kai. So Opal and Kai makes sense to be like a duo that go on this mission. We see Kai has Lefty here. We'll get introduced to Opal's Bison Juicy much later on. But I really like that the wingsuits are a really, really cool idea. so that you don't just have every character carrying around a glider. Instead, they're just wearing their wings in a way, and you could sort of see the over-reliance in a way on it from just Kai. Like, he falls and doesn't really make any attempt to like catch himself on like Lefty. He's just like, oh, I'll open the wings, but then he realizes it's cut. But you can see how much more skilled they are. Like, they're a rival of just the skydiving, like bullets straight down. They're used to being in the air, free falling, how to accelerate quickly and stuff like that, and how they just immediately land, take out the bandits initially, and showing that probably like these two are probably next in line to be Master Airbenders. I think when you really, really think about it, Kai was already felt like he is so solid. Opal has already been established to be sort of a natural at it, and now they've had 3 years of training. There's probably still a little bit to go before they get to the point of being masters, because you don't want to diminish getting the tattoos by just having like immediately, we have airbenders, we've been training for 3 years, now here's like 7 other people who are masters. They'll probably want to hold back on that, but I can definitely see Kai and Opal getting their tattoos somewhat, recently. Like, if that happened in the comics, I wouldn't have too much of a problem if they got them, of just establishing that they're that good. Whether or not like that speaks sort of like bad for like Iki and Milo, the fact that they're young and they also feel very good, I'm not sure, but there's probably still some explanation. Like, has Kai and Opal, have they both come up with their own unique airbending moves? Is that still a requirement here? I assume it is, so we're probably just waiting to see them reach that kind of master level, but they're really, really powerful, as we see here. Other than that, I suppose let's get into Wu. Let's talk about Wu and Mako and this kind of pairing. I think I don't mind Wu overall, and I'm talking about it in terms of his overall arc. I think they really managed to bring you around on the character right at the end, when he starts making some good decisions, when he starts caring about people. And he has a little bit of an arc where like Mako sort of helps him to discover like why you should care about people, and specifically, you're going to be the leader of a nation. You have to care about your subjects. Here's my family, they are your subjects. How do you feel about them? It's a nice little thing of a way to use Mako's family to do that with. I think the problem is that getting there, we have these first couple of episodes where he just comes across as being a little bit annoying, a little bit obnoxious, and basically taking up all of Mako's time on screen. In that Mako is just basically, Wu is forced upon Mako, and Mako is just, his time is just completely taken up by having to deal with Wu, be Wu's bodyguard. And now that Wu's kind of going to take over, Mako has to go with him, and you can just see the frustration. I appreciate that, like, you sort of develop his relationship with Lin, in that before it was definitely more formal, where you'd be like, Chief, you'd be somewhat formal with her, and especially in book 3, you could tell she respected him, but was still treating him as like, somewhat new. Now, you almost get the impression that they've known each other for so long that she no longer really like considers him the rookie anymore, and she's kind of going up to him all like, I know you're not going to like this, Mako, but you kind of have to be his kind of bodyguard for a little bit longer. You have to go with him. And how Mako can be a little bit more open with Lin and just be like, no, my life. I did like that dynamic, in that it was clearly different since then. That you see that Mako is obviously now in his, Mako's what, 21 or 2? So like you can see that there's that growth of between the two characters, of like, this is one of the reasons why I lean towards kind of saying that Mako probably has to be set up in terms of a bigger thing as he gets older to being the next chief of police. I think it's a very obvious thing because of how skilled he actually is. But yeah, Wu, like, some of the stuff he says is funny, but I think it's overdone. I think they came up with the idea for this character, and then they just had this like list of jokes that they felt the need to just have every scene of him kind of come across. I get you're trying to set up the idea that here is this guy who's going to become the next world leader. All of this stuff is being done for him. He's being treated as a celebrity in Republic City at this point in time. Kuvira is basically clearing up his nation for him. Mako's bodyguarding him. And he doesn't care about any of that. He just expects to be made king and things will be even better. And he doesn't care at all about what he actually has to do as part of his role as king. He doesn't really care about the people. And he's pretty much happy with letting everyone else basically make the decisions for him. You can see that he's just being used for his position, basically. No one actually cares about him in a way because there's nothing to him as a serious character, as we're pretty much going to see. He has to go in this arc to actually develop, which I think at least makes him somewhat interesting. It's just when they focus on him from purely a humor perspective before his development properly starts, it just feels like, please stop talking to me. But I also like that characters like Asami just immediately blank him. They're just like, no, you're just this obnoxious character. I don't care about you. Which I think is good that you at least present that most characters do find him annoying. And it's why when Kuvira enters the scene and you have Kuvira and Wu scenes, I like that you immediately see that people gravitate more towards Kuvira than Wu because she's a more charismatic leader. You can tell she's actually trying to do something even if she's going overboard with it. Whereas Wu just isn't doing anything. He's just a figurehead. So the arc ultimately picks up, but is it worth basically giving away most of Mako's screen time towards helping Wu have a character arc as opposed to actually giving Mako an arc of his own? I don't really think so. So there's kind of balances of like, on the one hand, Wu's arc comes around, on the other hand, Mako's arc doesn't really start in a way. But at least he's solid throughout this book, and they've gotten away from most of the awkwardness with the character, but we'll see how things go. Other than that, I talked about Opal, Bolin, Mako. Asami isn't really used all that much right now. She just opens up the new kind of train station, which is fine. Mako and Asami had a nice little scene, which I did appreciate, that they obviously hadn't seen each other in a while, and it was just kind of nice to see that she could acknowledge that I can't believe you have to be his bodyguard like all day long, pretty much. But yeah, I think that's all I want to say here. Obviously, there'll be time to discuss the arcs as we go through the rest of the episodes. But yeah, that's my, as usual, kind of slightly longer opening episode review for Book 4 Balance after all these years. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the start of Book 4. What are your thoughts on what I had to say about this episode? But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.